Welcome to The Critique. Today's submission explores the neuroscience behind morning routines, specifically focusing on brainwave modulation and that movers protocol to achieve peak performance. But honestly, framing the waking brain strictly as a linear progression from delta to beta waves oversimplifies the neurology.
It really does. It's a huge trap.
Right. So a key theme running through this material seems to be the exact sequence of how we wake up. Like the argument here is that waking up to a blaring alarm jerks the brain straight from a deep sleep, delta waves, directly into this fast, engaged beta state.
Which they compare to dropping a cold engine directly into fifth gear.
Exactly. And to build on that engine analogy, the text presents this view of brainwaves almost like an audio equalizer, like only one slider is allowed to be pushed up at any given time. And so the goal of the morning is to actively suppress that beta slider.
That's clearly laid out. I wonder, though, if we've considered that brainwaves simply do not operate in isolation like that.
Yeah, it's not a soundboard.
No, not at all. The human brain is infinitely more complex. I mean, at any given moment, your brain produces a constant, simultaneous mix of these frequencies across different cortical regions.
Right.
You don't just, leave delta behind and solely enter beta. You have localized alpha, theta, gamma activity, all happening at once depending on what specific neural networks are actually doing.
So treating them as these isolated, sequential states that we have to manually hack is just fundamentally misrepresenting the biology.
Exactly. It's a flawed narrative from the start.
Well, let me challenge the framing for a second, just to play devil's advocate. The submission heavily leans on the idea that early morning beta waves represent a stress state, right? And we need to actively delay that.
Right. The whole avoid stress angle.
Yeah. And since pop science often suggests beta activity correlates with high alert or anxious states, shouldn't we want to keep that specific slider pulled down while the nervous system boots up?
I would argue that relies on a very sloppy categorization of beta waves. I mean, beta is incredibly heterogeneous.
Meaning it's not all just anxiety.
Far from it. You have low beta, which is critical for standard, calm focus. And then you have high beta, which, sure, correlates with anxiety. Lumping them together is, it's just wrong.
Oh, wow. So if you actually suppressed all beta activity, you'd be a mess?
You would be completely lethargic, unfocused, functionally impaired. You need beta to process information, to coordinate complex movements, and honestly, just to navigate your physical environment.
You don't need to be protected from it.
No, your brain requires it to function.
Okay, so the underlying biological mechanism being presented is just inaccurate. To fix this, the author needs to pivot the explanation away from this abstract battle against beta waves.
Yes, completely.
They need to focus instead on optimizing the autonomic nervous system transitions and the endocrine responses.
Routines actually exert their real biological power.
Right. So instead of advising the audience to avoid early morning coffee because it theoretically adds beta waves, the material really should explain the actual endocrine mechanism at play.
Let's break down how that would look in the text. We already know that adenosine builds up as a byproduct of cellular metabolism, right?
Yeah, it creates sleep pressure.
Exactly. And caffeine is an adenosine antagonist.
Right, but wait. If caffeine blocks those receptors and adenosine is what makes us tired, wouldn't blocking it right upon waking still be a functional hack? Even if the author mislabeled it as a brainwave issue, isn't the advice to delay caffeine still practically sound?
The advice is sound, yeah. But the justification in the text falls apart under scrutiny because it completely ignores the cortisol awakening response.
Ah, the car?
Yes, the car. When you wake up, your body initiates this natural, very healthy spike in cortisol. It peaks roughly 30 to 45 minutes after you open your eyes.
It's basically the biological ignition switch.
Perfect way to put it. And concurrently, your system is trying to clear out the residual adenosine from the night before. But if you introduce caffeine into that specific window, you prematurely block the A1 and A2A receptors.
Oh, I see. So you are masking the sleep pressure without actually clearing the metabolic byproduct?
Precisely. And you interrupt the natural arc of that cortisol response. Because the caffeine only blocks the receptors rather than facilitating the actual clearance of the adenosine, you're creating a massive biochemical debt.
Right, because once the caffeine wears off,
Boom. It metabolizes, unbinds from those receptors in the early afternoon, and all that accumulated adenosine just floods back in.
and that's the afternoon crash.
That is the actual mechanism driving the crash, not some sudden shift in brainwave frequencies. Grounding the routine in endocrinology and circadian alignment just makes the science so much more robust.
And it gives the reader a tangible process to manage.
Exactly.
Okay, well, if the primary goal of this early morning window is to properly manage that autonomic shift, we really have to look at the cognitive payload the material is asking the brain to process right after waking up.
You mean the mental exercises?
Yeah, let's look closely at the section discussing visualization. The material highlights those famous studies involving piano players, right? Arguing that mental rehearsal grows brain cells and muscle power almost equally to physical practice.
Right. Presenting it as a superpower.
Yeah, and honestly, reading this framing feels a bit like claiming reading a recipe provides the exact same nutritional value as eating the meal.
That makes sense. But could the evidence also support a different conclusion? Like the fact that visualization is fundamentally a priming mechanism rather than a total replacement mechanism?
Priming versus replacement, that's a huge distinction.
It is. Because overstating the neuroplastic outcomes of visualization and completely omitting its physical limitations, it risks making the material sound hyperbolic.
Wait, let me push back on that a bit. Because the submission explicitly cites peer-reviewed studies demonstrating that muscle strength, specifically finger abduction strength, did increase significantly from visualization alone.
Yes, those studies exist.
So if the supplementary motor area and the premotor cortex are lighting up and those pathways are being paved, why isn't that enough to build the habit or the physical strength? The data seems to back up the author's claim.
The data backs up an increase in neural drive, not tissue adaptation.
Oh, okay.
There is a massive physiological difference there. Mental rehearsal effectively primes the motor cortex, which improves your central nervous system's ability to recruit existing motor units.
It enhances rate coding.
Yes, but fundamentally, it cannot build muscular hypertrophy. I mean, if I visualize a heavy deadlift, my muscle fibers are not experiencing mechanical tension.
There are no micro tears for tissue growth.
Exactly. My tendons aren't adapting to load.
And, there's no physical environment to interact with either.
Right, which means there is zero proprioceptive feedback. And proprioception is your body's ability to sense its position and movement in space.
So without it, your brain isn't learning how to adapt to unexpected shifts.
No, it doesn't feel gravity or structural resistance. Or to use the piano example, a key pushing back against your finger with a specific weight.
So the neural pathway is active, but the feedback loop is completely broken.
Completely.
So the suggestion here is to nuance the claim. The text really needs to describe visualization as a powerful optimizer of the neuromuscular junction and a tool for strategic outcome mapping.
Not a one-to-one substitute for physical reps.
Right. We want to preserve the enthusiasm for the practice, obviously, because visualization is undeniably powerful.
Very powerful when applied correctly.
But we have to ground it in reality. So a highly actionable way to improve this section is to introduce the concept of mental contrasting with implementation intentions, or MCII.
Yes, MCII is perfect for this.
Let's unpack how that would function as a concrete example in this manuscript. Because usually, standard sports psychology advises the reader to visualize a picture-perfect scenario.
The perfect golf swing.
The flawless podcast interview.
And that is the most common trap in productivity literature. Imagining the flawless execution feels good, sure, but it doesn't prepare the nervous system for friction.
So they should advise the audience to use visualization to actively map out neurological responses to potential obstacles instead.
Exactly. What happens if the microphone cuts out in the middle of a recording? What happens if your slide deck crashes during a keynote?
I have to ask, though, if we tell the reader to spend their morning visualizing their slide deck crashing, aren't we risking negative priming?
How so?
Well, it just seems counterintuitive to start the day by dwelling on failure.
But you aren't dwelling on the failure. You are mapping the recovery.
Oh, okay.
That is the core of the implementation intention, the if-then plan.
If the microphone cuts out, then I will, seamlessly project my voice to the back of the room?
Yes, while maintaining eye contact. By mentally contrasting your desired outcome with the real obstacles that stand in the way, you genuinely prime the prefrontal cortex to override the limbic system's fear response when things inevitably go wrong.
It shifts the processing away from the amygdala.
Exactly, because the fear response originates in the amygdala. If you haven't rehearsed the obstacle, the amygdala just hijacks the brain under stress.
Just dumps cortisol and adrenaline everywhere?
In a totally chaotic way, causing you to freeze. But by mapping the obstacle in advance, you give the prefrontal cortex a pre-written script to execute.
You maintain executive control.
Right. This offers a much more scientifically grounded use of visualization. It prepares the brain for the chaos of reality rather than just some fantasy simulation.
Okay, so if effective visualization requires this highly active prefrontal mapping of obstacles and implementation intentions, that perfectly tees up what I see as the biggest structural flaw in the submissions routine.
The sheer cognitive load?
Yes, I can see what you're going for here. Let's see how we can strengthen this. The submission outlines this M-overs routine, right? It's an acronym for meditation, oxygenation, visualization, exercise, reading, and scribing.
It's a lot.
The instruction is to do 5 minutes of each, back to back, immediately after waking up.
Is there a risk that focusing solely on jamming all these disparate activities into a tiny 30-minute window demands far too much executive function from a brain that just woke up?
That's exactly the weakness. A rigid 6-task morning routine requires constant monitoring and transition management.
Constant.
And this high demand on executive function causes decision fatigue, which actively depletes the prefrontal cortex before the actual workday has even begun.
It directly contradicts the routine's stated goal of preserving cognitive energy.
Totally. Because we know the prefrontal cortex operates on a strictly limited metabolic budget.
It handles working memory, task switching, impulse control. The neuroenergetics of what this routine demands are staggering, honestly.
I could imagine.
Every time you switch from meditation to oxygenation, you have to consciously disengage from one neural network and activate a completely different one.
And then what, 5 minutes later, you stop the breath work to begin your MCI visualization?
Right. 5 minutes later, you stop that to go exercise. Then you stop sweating to read.
But let me play devil's advocate here. These are all low-friction, highly positive habits. We're talking about reading a few pages of a book or doing a quick breathing exercise.
Sure.
They aren't doing complex calculus. Shouldn't the basal ganglia take over these processes once they become habits, bypassing the prefrontal cortex entirely and eliminating that cognitive drain?
If they actually became automated routines, yes, the basal ganglia would take over. But the structure of this protocol prevents automation entirely.
Because of the constant switching?
Yes. Psychologists refer to the friction here as switch cost. Because these tasks are time-boxed to 5 minutes and constantly rotated, they never fade into procedural memory.
They never become automatic.
No. Your brain constantly has to load the rules for the new task while actively suppressing the rules of the old task. And on top of that, you're monitoring a clock to ensure you switch on time.
Ah. So the constant monitoring keeps it anchored as an executive task.
Exactly. Every time you shift your attention, there's a measurable delay in cognitive processing and a spike in glucose consumption in the frontal lobe.
And doing this 6 times in 30 minutes, right after waking up?
You're essentially burning through your executive function reserves for the whole day.
Wow. So to fix this, the suggestion is to streamline the structural recommendation. The author should really abandon that rigid 6-letter checklist entirely.
Throw it out.
Instead, use biological categorization and intuitive habit stacking to achieve the same physiological goals without that switch cost.
Rather than a rapid-fire checklist, they need to look at what these habits actually do to the nervous system.
Right. Group the mover's habits into 2 biological objectives, downregulation and upregulation.
Yes. Downregulation activities activate the parasympathetic nervous system, increasing vagal tone.
So that includes the meditation and oxygenation practices, like the slow, rhythmic breath work.
Exactly. And upregulation activities activate the sympathetic nervous system, boosting alertness, blood flow, heart rate.
Which covers exercise and visualization.
Right.
And the actionable advice for the reader would be to pick just one practice from each category to create a sustainable, neurocompatible ritual.
Just one.
Yeah. We want to give concrete examples of habit stacking to completely remove the cognitive load of task switching.
A perfect example of habit stacking for this manuscript would be combining breathwork with a morning walk in the sun.
Let's break down exactly why that stack works neurologically compared to the old movers protocol.
Well, it seamlessly combines oxygenation, exercise, and circadian rhythm activation from the sunlight into a single low-friction event.
Zero task switching.
Zero. You simply walk, maintain a specific breathing cadence, and let the optic flow quiet the amygdala.
So the autonomic nervous system gets the exact sympathetic upregulation it needs to clear the adenosine.
Yes, and trigger the cortisol awakening response we discussed earlier.
And because there's no timer dictating a switch to a new activity every 5 minutes, the basal ganglia can actually take over the rhythmic mechanics of walking and breathing.
Precisely. The prefrontal cortex isn't taxed at all. You preserve that executive metabolic budget for the deep work you need to do later in the day.
The reader's audience will find this significantly easier to adopt and maintain over the long term, too.
Because it actually respects the biological limits and the energetic reality of the waking brain.
That brings us to a really clear path forward for this material. To concisely recap our main takeaways today, first, we need to elevate the physiological discussion from basic brainwave toggling to the deeply impactful realm of endocrinology.
Right, leaning into the mechanics of the CAR and adenosine clearance.
Second, we want to nuance the true capabilities of visualization by incorporating MCII, or mental contrasting with implementation intentions, grounding the practice firmly in real-world neuroplasticity and prefrontal mapping.
Not treating it like a magic substitute for physical practice.
Exactly. And finally, preventing prefrontal cortex depletion by streamlining that morning routine through intuitive habit stacking, eliminating the massive switch cost associated with microtasking.
Implementing these shifts will dramatically elevate the scientific rigor and the practical utility of the material. I mean, it takes a good premise and aligns it with how the nervous system actually operates.
Absolutely. We warmly invite the listener to implement these suggestions and submit their revised material for a future critique. Let's make sure that when we go to start our morning engines, we let the fluids warm up, align our biological gears, and drive forward smoothly, instead of just grinding straight into fifth gear.